Eric from Ohio had a farm. E-I-E-I-O. On that farm he had some pigs. E-I-E-I-O. With a sheep here and a goat there. Eric from Ohio had a farm. E-I-E-I-O.
Eric from Ohio had a farm. E-I-E-I-O.
Eric from Ohio had a book.
E-I-E-I-O. And that book made no sense. E-I-E-I-O. So we fed it here, fed it there, pages flying everywhere.
Eric from Ohio had a farm. E-I-E-I-O. Sometimes he shoots it straight.
E-I-E-I-O.
Sometimes he wipes his butt.
E-I-E-I-O. Pages spin and chaos reign. Sheep just stare like
Bro's insane.
the Quran is such a stupid book. E-I-E-I-O.
Every day the book gets zooted. Zoot, 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 zoot. Same book gets eaten. Zoot, 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 zoot. It gets zooted here, zooted there, zooted everywhere.
Everywhere. Eric from Ohio zooted that book.
And welcome, everybody. E-I-E-I-O. I am joined today by Womb to Tomb Apologetics. Welcome on up here. We have an interesting topic for you. What is not in the Quran, what the Quran missed. Bunch of information. But before we dive into that, Womb to Tomb Apologetics, will you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey guys, good to be here with Eric. I am Womb to Tomb Apologetics, and I, on my channel, cover faith, culture, and sometimes do that with a bit of memes and humor, like Eric is also fond of, as we can see by his introduction there. So yeah, but today we're going over the Quran and the Bible and the differences they have between them regarding the Christmas story and the birth of Christ and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, good to be here.
So yeah, like you said, thank you very much for joining us. But yeah, we're focusing on the birth of Christ as the aspect, mostly because that's kind of just a little bit of an important point in Christianity, just a little bit, right? And I mean, that is also something that's supposed to be important in Islam. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard Muslims tell me, we love Jesus more than you. I'm like, and how well do you actually know him? After all, I've got 4 books about Jesus's ministry. You don't even have one complete book about Jesus' ministry. You have some parts within the Quran, and thanks to Womb to Tomb Apologetics, we can dive into that. So, do you want to give a little quick synopsis here on really why you decided to do this?
Yeah, so a little bit ago, people can check this out on my channel, I did a reading of the Christmas story in the Bible and the Christmas story in the Quran. I read every single verse in each of them, did a commentary on each of them. So it's an interesting Bible study if that's all you want out of it. But if you're interested in the comparison, you can check that out. But I decided to do this because it's Christmas time, or at least it was at the time. Why not check that out? I knew that the Quran had things to say about it, and I had heard all these wild stories, but I wanted to check it out for myself, right? You don't want to just go off rumors. Let's actually read these sources and peek through them and see which one of them is reliable. A lot of people don't know the Quran doesn't talk about a lot of things that you find in the Bible, but also fascinatingly, it adds all sorts of stuff that isn't in the Bible. People are surprised to hear that in the Quran, Mary doesn't give birth in a manger, she gives birth under a palm tree, right? Joseph isn't even present. There's no Herod or wise men or shepherds or any of that stuff. There's no star. All of these things that we typically associate with the Christmas story. We see them in movies and television, and even when we read our Bibles, that's not there. It's not present. And so it's
Real
kind of a
quick,
question of like, where exactly is Muhammad getting all this stuff from? And
Yeah.
which one should we trust, right? Because both Christians and Muslims believe that Christ was born and it had significance, but who should we trust?
Yes, I mean, it's very interesting to hear and say, okay, there are some massive differences. Definitely because we'll hear from Muslims saying, well, you see, the Quran came and it corrected some minor details or some things that got astray. And it's like, you're just describing some of the things that is corrected. It's like, that's most of the story is just gutted right
Yeah.
there. I mean, you have this. Go ahead.
Yeah, and not only that, but I think particularly with this story itself, the birth of Christ, that claim that the Quran is coming as a correction becomes particularly difficult to defend because the Quran throughout it has a lot of plagiarism, but in this story in particular, there is a massive amount of plagiarism. There's not a lot of content to begin with in the Quran on this story. The Bible has about 185 verses that I went through on the story. The Quran only has 56. Very, very short bit of it, and most of it's repetitive. Most of its material, though, even the little bit of it that it has, is plagiarized. And so we can go over some of that too. But we know precisely where the Quran gets its information, where Muhammad is stealing from. And most of it's not from the Bible. So when the Quran is alleged to be this correction of the Bible and that it's directly from Allah, right? Allah is revealing this is new information, right? It's not from the mind of Muhammad. It's not from the minds of anyone else. God is coming down and correcting this stuff, allegedly. Well, why can we see where he's copied his homework from, right? Why can we tell exactly where these sources are and assess their credibility too? Why is that happening if this is really original? Well, the answer is it's not original. It's retelling of other stories. So
I think that is the key. It's not original. It's not the authentic. It's completely fabricated. Just like I'll relate this quite a few times whenever I'm talking to Muslims or to anyone else that says, "Well, you see, the Quran is really just the Bible, but the original." And it's like, no, because that's not how this works. If you have something that's a fabrication of falsehood, it normally comes afterwards. Like, for example, a counterfeit bill. Which is the original, counterfeit bill or the authentic? Well, of course, the authentic would have to come first, then the counterfeit. And we see this within the Quran itself. We see the counterfeit coming through and saying, "Oh, I can see where you got some of these stories from that are within the Quran itself, where it's supposed to be Allah's eternal word. It's supposed to have lasted forever on clay tablets with him. But it seems to be things that were spread around, and some of them are just outright fables."
yeah, and you make an excellent point, right? Why, if this is a correction, why is it that the Quran is taking its information from sources that come often hundreds of years after the events, and the Bible is quite literally the earliest sources we have on the events. Why are we trusting something that's taken from a later source? How can that be a correction? Why is it that the earliest people got it wrong, but people later got it right? That doesn't make any sense. It's like if I want to learn about a historical figure and what happened, I want to go to the earliest sources, not the later ones. Why would adding a few hundred years away from the event make someone more reliable? And that's unfortunately a question that Muslims struggle with. I don't know how they even begin to answer something like that without basically just, distracting to another topic, right? I mean, it makes no sense. So, yeah, we can go over some of the sources that it copies from, but if you'd like to maybe start before we get there, because that's a little juicier, maybe we want to save it for later, we can talk about just what the differences are to begin with
Yeah,
between the Bible and the Quran?
let's go point by point on what the difference is on the story and why they matter. Because some of
Yeah.
those that you listed off are pretty critical. People might not realize how important these parts are, and I'll explain more later on. But go ahead and pick one from your list, and we'll just start with that one.
Yeah. So the first kind of overall difference, as I mentioned, is the length. The Bible gives you a lot more material, 185 verses. It's 47 from Matthew, 136 from Luke. And then you can kind of argue John talks in like 2 verses about the incarnation. So that's quite a bit of material, especially from Luke. And then the Quran only has about 56, most of which is very repetitive information. Um, and so we already begin to see the Bible is giving us more content, it's earlier content, and it comes from sources that would be more reliable. So Matthew, for example, if you take him to be the author, obviously Muslims are going to try to dispute that, but if he is the actual author of his gospel, he's a disciple. John is a disciple. Luke, while not a disciple, is someone who does a lot of history. He is a historian in some sense. And so they're all taking a lot of care to go through this. And I think that's something you'll notice when you read them is the Bible is really trying to be careful with its details. Matthew starts off with a genealogy, and he's really, let me read all this off to you to show you that Jesus is the Messiah, basically. And he goes through, and they're telling the details in this sort of biographical sense, on this biographical approach. Whereas the Quran, it's almost more of an argumentative. It's not narrative like the Bible. It's argumentative, as Dr. James White puts it. Jesus in the Bible is a person, but Jesus in the Quran is an argument. There's even a point in, I think it's Surah 19, where Jesus speaks from the cradle, and he does this unprompted. No one's asked him about, can God have a son? Or even implied that Jesus is God's son. There's no implication anywhere. Out of nowhere, Jesus says, as a baby, far be it from Allah to have a son. It's like, why did he just unprompted give us that information? It's like Jesus is almost breaking the fourth wall to tell the audience, and by the way, Christianity's wrong. It's sort of this historical revisionism, basically. Kind of like how almost as if you were listening to like a liberal tell you about the gospel, and they wrote their own version of it, and they said, and then Jesus said, deportation is wrong, and we need common sense sword control from all these mass stabbings and stuff. And you're like, oh, hold on, wait a minute. It sounds like you're almost like inserting a modern idea or a modern argument into the lips of Jesus so that you can make him say what you want. So you can almost grab his authority, basically. And that's what the Quran does.
Well, real quick here, I think you hit on a very interesting point here with the Jesus in the cradle and coming out right way, declaring that he's not the son of Allah. Allah wouldn't have a son, sort of concept there, which is very obvious that it is supposed to be anti-Christian in its nature, anti-Trinitarian. But it's unprompted. It's unnatural. We look at the Bible and we see natural conversations that happen. In the Quran, and this is something that's typical throughout it, a lot of the references to historical characters outside of Muhammad are always about some sort of point. They're always making this statement, even if it makes no logical sense, like you're saying, because no one was declaring, oh, this must be Allah's son. No, it's just breaking the fourth wall there because he's using it as justification to say, oh, look, Christians are wrong here. And even Jesus in the cradle denied this. And you have Jesus just popping up saying, yep, Muhammad, that's right. I mean, that would be the level you see here. It's just the pop up, like, say whatever Muhammad needs for that situation, and then he's out.
Precisely, yeah. It's like an anachronistic insertion, going back to make Jesus say what I want him to say. But, and that's something we see throughout the ages. The Gnostics do that as well. They're trying to use the authority of Jesus for their own purposes. And we see that even today, like I said, with liberalism, we see that everywhere. People like the authority of the Bible, they like the authority of Jesus, they like the authority of God, but they don't like the things that those authorities say. And so they have to twist them, reinterpret them, or even in cases like this, literally insert words in their mouths that they never even said. And so, to a Muslim watching this, I guess I would ask you, how can you be so confident just on that basis alone that this isn't Muhammad pulling the wool over your eyes, basically? Because it's so on the nose, it very clearly isn't historical. Whereas we have these really, really early testimonies that seem to be taking very careful historical care about the details that they relay. So, yeah.
At the same time, it's very clearly claiming that this is a historical event that actually happened, where Jesus is laying there speaking as a baby, saying these things. Now, this ayah in the Quran also pulls up an interesting point as well, because who's Mary's brother in this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, that's the other thing too, is it's good you bring this up. I was just thinking the same thing. It's not just that the Quran is pulling from these bad sources. It's very clear the author is not well informed about the things he's relaying. So you bring up Mary's brother in the Quran. What's the point of bringing that up? Well, in the Quran, 2 times it specifies that Mary is the daughter of Amram and the sister of Aaron. That's Aaron, Moses' brother. It doesn't say Moses' brother, but that's the family. And so what's going on there? Because Moses lived about 1,200 years before Jesus, and same thing with Amram. And in fact, one of the chapters of the Quran where we get this information from is literally named Al-Imran, which is Amram. Like, it's literally named after Amram, and then another one is named after Maryam, which is their name for Mary, the mother of Jesus. So there's no escape from this. It's very clear. It's trying to say she is the daughter of Amram and the sister of Aaron. What's going on? Well, Muhammad, it seems, mixed up Miriam, who is the actual sister of Aaron in the Bible, and Mary, who in, I guess, Arabic would be Maryam, right? Miriam and Maryam kind of sound similar. He mixes those two up and conflates them as one person, basically, because he's hearing all these stories, but he doesn't. He's basically a baby when it comes to all of this new information. He's never heard much about Christianity before, or Judaism. So he kind of hears these names and he mixes them up. And so this is kind of a massive Quran blunder we find within the Christmas story.
So just going off of that, because we'll see this as we continue going through, we'll see different blunders from a historical standpoint, because you can very easily see, okay, this is when this is supposed to be taking place. We have historical evidence that some of these things that happened in the Bible did occur. In fact, we have evidence that nothing the Bible said didn't happen. So it's not been disproven by history. Everything the Bible said has been proven, or we just don't have historical evidence for yet. So that being said, we know approximately when Moses lived. So we know that time period. We definitely know when Jesus lived. So we see this huge gap. And I know that some Muslims would say, well, they're just, brother, just means that they're related somehow. No, it's actually very specific there that they are directly related there. And then you have father and daughter being related, reinforcing that. So this is a massive historical error within the Quran itself. These are sort of things that I test whenever I've read the Bible and I was looking through it originally, is for, and I still do this, I keep my ears out for this, historical evidences that we can see in place, very specific. And I've mentioned this in other live streams. This is one of my favorite things to do with the Bible, is to listen to stories and where it is extremely specific and then test that.
Yeah.
I forget how long ago it was, but what section it was. Probably we were going through 1 Samuel, so it's probably somewhere in 1 Samuel. There was a mention to something extremely specific, and I couldn't get to any other conclusion than you would have to be there in person to get it right. So you'd have to be someone from that culture at that time period to get it right. You can't just make it up later on and be like, oh, that's exactly how it is. Definitely, because it lined up with history perfectly.
Yeah.
So we have one of the examples would be the sea people coming in. We know that the Bronze Age collapse happened. There were sea people who came in from the sea. There's still some speculation on where they came in from into the Canaan region, and basically drove out the inhabitants up into the mountains. And then that's when the Israelites came up through. So you have this massive upheaval, which then makes sense historically with the biblical accounts. That sort of stuff is missing here. The Quran doesn't have that. In fact, it says the opposite. What we historically see, it contradicts. So which is true? All our historical research or the Quran? That's what you're led to in this one instance.
Yeah. And I think another interesting point here is...
Oh, here we go. We got sorry, real quick. We got a comment from a Muslim in the chat.
Yeah, I wanted to address those
sense.
Right.
See,
yeah, we can get into that. Just one moment here.
Go ahead.
We can, because I do want to respond to him too, because he is making some interesting points on what they will say in response to some of these questions that we're raising here. But I just wanted to say that it's interesting that Mary is the only woman in the entire Quran who is named. And yet, as we just discussed, they don't even seem to really know who she is, and they kind of mix her up with Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, right? So the women are not particularly, they're not getting a massive place in the Quran in the same way that you find in the Bible. Interestingly enough, in Matthew's genealogy, for example, there are 4 women explicitly named. And they don't have to be named because it's a it's a patriarchal lineage that it's going through, and yet it goes out of its way. Matthew goes out of his way to name some women. We don't have to get into that too much unless you'd like to explore it, but there is some significance to that, showing that women have played a role in salvation history. And so the Bible does elevate women, I think, and places them in a very important roles in the biblical narrative and in humanity and in life. It says they're made in the image of God just like men are. And the Quran, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to take them quite as seriously, at least not in my observation anyway. So yeah, but it's
No,
just kind of an
that's
interesting
fair.
fact. She's the only one who's named, and yet it's still mixing her up with someone else. So
No, that's an interesting point. In fact, the Muslim cowboy over there said that was one of his complaints about the Bible, is that there was the wife of Cain wasn't named. And I was sitting there like, and how many women in the Quran are named? It's not a
yeah,
nitpick that I would have.
right.
But if he wants to stand on that, saying that there's an obvious biblical contradiction because it doesn't name the woman, and it's like, you
Don't throw
have the same
stones at
issue.
a yeah. Don't throw stones at a bunker when you live in a glass house, right?
I think
So
another thing you were pointing out was treatment of women. Both in Islam, women are half the intelligence of a man. They are deficient in both intelligence and religion, not
mm,
because of their decisions or choices that they make, but how Allah made them. So they're already set up for failure at the very beginning. Where you look in the Bible, you see, yes, men and women were made in the image of God. It wasn't that man was made in the image of God and then women were made in the image of man. No, they were both made in the image of God. At the same time, who were the first ones who got the good news of Jesus' resurrection in the Bible? It was women. Women then went and told the men. Interesting point there, because in Islam, their witness would not be accepted as the same level of a man's.
mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that would be a huge difference between the two. And yes, the very fact that she is like the only woman by name, named by name in the Quran, it's rather interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And then maybe let's see if I can pull it up. Yeah, can you pull up the second comment by the Grinch guy? We can go over a few of these. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so I guess this is a Muslim friend of ours commenting. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your viewership. So, but he has a few objections here that I think it's pertinent for us to talk about, because we don't want to just look at this from one side. We want to make sure that we're giving, Islam a fair chance, and let's hear what their responses to some of these things are, and what some of their criticisms of the Bible are. So he starts off here talking about how Prophet Jesus was very respectful towards his mother and honored her in the Quran, basically, which is true. In the Quran, he does honor her, and they claim that he will stick up for her chastity, basically. That's one of the reasons why he speaks. When I read through that passage, I didn't really find that, and perhaps I missed it. I've read it a number of times, like many, many times. I didn't come across Jesus defending her chastity.
No.
But that seems to be a very common claim of theirs. If I'm missing it, please provide the verses for us. I'd love to correct that if I'm wrong.
We may
But
be waiting a
that
while.
wasn't something I saw very explicitly. But in any case, that would be a great thing, and he honors his mother, and that's great. You should honor your mother. It's literally in the Bible, right? Honor your father and mother. But then he says, Jesus rudely addresses his mother as woman in the Bible. And I think I would just say that's probably more of an anachronism there, trying to say, oh, that was rude back then. I don't think Jesus was rudely referring to anyone. He often refers to women as woman. Today, that's a little weird. Like, you don't usually say that to someone, but I wouldn't say that that's rude. I think that's just how Jesus spoke. Jesus spoke kind of odd, honestly. I would say, he had lots of weird ways of addressing himself. He often talks in the third person and things like that. You will see the Son of Man, yada, yada. Well, who's the Son of Man? Well, I'm the Son of Man. Why is he talking in the third person? So Jesus does talk a little odd, but I wouldn't say that that's rude. I think Jesus actually treated not only his mother, but many women with respect in the Bible. In the book of John, for example, the very first person he even appears to, I think, is the woman at the well, right? Jesus treats women in the Bible with extreme respect. In
Well,
fact,
women,
it's
real
so
quick,
it's
real
so
quick.
shocking that some of his critics even kind of
Yeah.
are shocked by it. They're like, "Wait, why is he talking to this woman with the blood disease? Why is he, talking to these sort of outcasts of society?" He says, "Let this woman, dump the perfume on his feet and all of that, and on and on it goes." But
Real quick, it wasn't it as far as first appearing, it wasn't the woman at the well that he appeared to, but he did talk to her on her level, which is very interesting. Now,
what
again,
I meant was not appearing after the resurrection. I think it's the first person he like. I think he goes to the wedding at Cana and then that happens or something. But in any case, yeah, it's one of the first people he kind of goes to in his ministry, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
so just focusing on here, we see this in the Quran whenever it's referring to historical characters. Yes, the respect he's claiming, one is Dawa script. But even then, whenever you look at how they're acting like someone that Muhammad would have seen around them. They're not acting like people in that culture.
Yeah.
So the respect or any sort of respect that he wanted to show someone in history showing, he'd put it in terms that would appeal to an Arabian at that time, not necessarily a Jew in the first century. So yeah, so the reference to woman being an insult isn't really true because again, we're just putting, like you said, it's just putting our standards now and projecting it back onto someone. We can't really do that. Now, if you want to say that one person is the code of conduct for all mankind for all time, we can look at their actions and say, their actions aren't really worth respecting. That's completely valid. But to say, he's talking a way I don't like talking, someone nowadays would find insulting, you can't really project like that, honestly,
Yeah.
within history.
Well, and I would say, who should we follow? Should we follow the example of Jesus, who treated women well, or should we follow the example of Muhammad, who said women have half the intelligence of men, and beat his wives and was a polygamist and did all these terrible things? I mean, who do you think treats women better? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. And then you can go to the next comment if you want, the one about the purity and all that. I'll also point out it's very funny. The commenter has the Grinch as his icon with a Christmas hat, which is so fitting for today's discussion, isn't it?
Yeah, it
As
actually
we're
is.
talking about the Christmas story. So, yeah. So, but anyway, he goes through and he repeats another thing that Muslims often say, which is that the Bible authors don't ever defend Mary's purity, which is a strange claim because, I mean, obviously it does say that she calls her a virgin, and it's confirmed with the angel's appearance to Joseph. No, no, don't worry, she hasn't been adulterous or anything like that. But Muslims will often bring up, well, there's no public thing. There's a private appearance to Joseph, but publicly she's never shown to be chaste, which is an interesting claim. But I find it fascinating the types of criticisms that Muslims have for the Bible versus the kind of criticisms Christians have for the Quran. You'll notice that our criticisms of the Quran are mainly historical and reliability based. We're saying, well, hold on, how can we trust this story? Is this uh, look at this plagiarism here. Look at how this guy makes an error. Look at this. Can we really trust this? Comes, hundreds of years later. Can we trust this guy versus that guy? We're assessing credibility. Whereas Muslims, their common claims about this are in reference to basically like virtue signaling and sort of making it look. How does it make people look? Right? That Mary doesn't look as good. We make her look better. Jesus looks better here, or this or that. But I guess the question I would ask you, Eric, is which would you rather have? Would you rather have a story that is made up and plagiarized and false that elevates people even more than was true in reality? Or would you rather follow something that you know is true and just tells you the facts.
I'd rather have the facts. I don't want
Right.
fluffy garbage mumbo jumbo. I'd rather just have it straight up and told to me one way or the other. I'd rather just have the truth
Yeah.
without
And,
any
and
sort
that's
of
that's the
filter.
difference, is that the Quran, perhaps, I mean, I'm not saying it's a false thing to say, like, oh yeah, allegedly there is this statement where Jesus defends her chastity. Again, I haven't found that in my readings. I looked all through, I didn't find it. But if that's true, hey, great. Props to the Quran for saying Mary was chaste. We agree with you. But that doesn't make the Quran better, because it tells you one truth among a bunch of lies, right? What we should be looking at is this story true? He says Bible authors didn't know this, that Jesus spoke from the cradle and all that. Well, didn't know this, that yeah, they didn't know it because it didn't happen. This is a story that comes from much, much later. It comes from the Arabic Infancy Gospel in the 500s AD. That's the origin of Jesus speaking from the cradle. It's not from the earliest historical sources. That's the first time it comes up. And in the Quran, allegedly, it comes in about chapter 19, verses 29 to 33 is where that's found. But yeah, the Arabic Infancy Gospel is not a historical source from which you should draw your understanding of the Christmas story. So, and then the next comment he brings up refers
before
to.
we continue that real quick,
Yeah.
let's see, Miriam, I believe it is 27. Because I want to check something here in terms of people crying. Because I don't remember Jesus saying that about
Yeah,
her
it's
being
I hear it
pure.
often. They keep
But
saying that he says that, but I didn't catch it. Maybe it's a different wording or something. If I'm wrong, I'm
I
happy
mean,
to
there's a
adjust.
statement saying, "Oh, sister of Aaron," which is the massive issue historically. Your father was not in. Sorry, lost my place there. Sorry, indecent man, nor was your mother unchaste. I don't see where Jesus here talks about her being and declares to everyone that she is some sort of pure virgin here that's never been touched by man. There is declaration that she is by others, but not necessarily
Sure.
Jesus from the cradle. Jesus is declaring that he's not the son of Allah and that he is given the gospel, the Injil. That he does declare. Again, when it comes down to it, what I'm seeing here is the reaction that you would need to have within an Arab culture, not the reaction you would need to have in a Jewish culture.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at the passage right now. Again, I don't see where he defends her chastity. I don't see that. It says her father and mother were not unchaste, I guess, but I don't see that about Mary. So anyway, though, yeah. So
yeah, sorry, not actually there according to the research, and I have no recollection. I've gone through this quite a few times. I have no recollection of him actually saying it himself from the cradle, which is what you're saying the miracle was. Jesus was given this miracle in order to speak as a baby so he could, defend his mother's purity, which seems like an odd miracle to give in respect to the Bible, because that's not a typical pattern that we see within the Bible. What we would see is an angel. We'd see a
yeah,
message. That's what we would typically see. We wouldn't see a baby suddenly jump up and start talking to the people. Now, that being said, there are like talking donkeys in one situation, but that was odd. It wasn't the average.
Yeah.
So it's just an outlier. So pull up his last comment here. You wanted to hit this?
Yeah, and so then he goes into this idea of he gives a response, basically a common Muslim response that, well, it's saying she was a sister of Aaron in the sense of faith and piety, and it's just kind of saying she's good, just like Aaron was good. And he claims this is done for like tribes and things like that. I have yet to find an actual instance, if this Muslim or any other Muslim watching wants to give us a Quranic reference where that is also used. So and so is the brother of so and so, and it's just meant as in he's really righteous. Please provide it. I have no knowledge of this anywhere in the Quran or anywhere else in history. This is a claim Muslims make. I have yet to see the proof of it. And secondarily, another reason why I don't take this response seriously, that the Quran says that she is the sister of Aaron, but it also says she's the daughter of Amram. So if this is a metaphor for like, oh, it's just the sister of Aaron thing, it's also giving her lineage vertically as well as horizontally, which, why would it be doing that if this is just a catchphrase? Why is it also saying she's the daughter of Amram? What's going on there? That sounds the plain reading of the text seems to be this is an actual lineage, right? It does not appear to be any sort of figure of speech, and that's a big problem. I don't buy this explanation. I know that that's a common explanation, but I don't buy it. And I think it's also shown to be weak by the fact that I've looked into other explanations that Muslims give, and I think it was even who is it? Dr. Shabir Ali, who even suggests it could be that her father really was Amram. His name was Amram, but he was living at the time of Jesus. And he just happened to name his children after the Amram from the Old Testament's children, right? He's like, oh, look, I'm Amram. Maybe I'll name my son Aaron and I'll name my daughter Miriam, and it'll be kind of like a callback sort of. These are all a stretch, like a big, big stretch. These are all ad hoc explanations. I think the plain reading of the text shows us that Muhammad is making a mistake here.
At the same time, it should be, if this was, let's take a hypothetical here, saying, okay, yeah, it's the Jews are saying that she's, equivalent because she's like extra spiritual, extra pious, like the Muslims are claiming. So it's equal in a sense. So it's a claim of being this equal person, equal piety wise to this person. The issue with that is if they were saying because she's so high, because she's like the top of the time, and that's why she was chosen to give birth to Jesus and all this, if that's the claim they want to make, they wouldn't have chosen Aaron.
Yeah,
they would have chosen Moses.
Yeah, more likely, yeah.
Because Aaron's held, he's like, so. You have Moses. As far as respect goes, in the Jewish mindset at the time, it was Moses, Abraham, and David would be like the top three guys. And those would vary a little bit counting on how you looked at it. But those would be the most, like, if anyone's going to be related, it would be like those guys were the top, cream of the crop. You have Aaron here, which biblically wasn't the best person. Let's be honest. God did not pick him to be next after Moses as far as like the leader. No, there's a good reason. Go back, read the story. It's very obvious why. But yeah, it wouldn't make any sense for them to make that claim unless this is what the plain text says it is, which they think that she's actually the sister of Aaron.
Yeah. And why don't we actually go through just a moment here back to the whole speaking from the cradle thing. You can take his comment down if you like, but let's go through, and I'd like to actually show you a real-time comparison between what Muhammad says in the Quran, or what he's giving us the Quran, what the Quran says, and the source that he's copying from. So let me actually read first just a short passage from the Quran. This is Robert Spencer's translation in the Critical Quran I'm reading from here, but you can also find it online if you'd like.
Excellent one.
It says, he spoke, indeed, I am the slave of Allah. This is Jesus speaking. He has given me the book and has appointed me a prophet. I'm starting in chapter 19, verse 30. Now verse 31, and has made me blessed wherever I may be, and has commanded for me prayer and almsgiving as long as I remain alive, and dutiful toward her who bore me, and has not made me arrogant, unblessed. Peace be upon me the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I will be raised alive. Such was Jesus, the Son of Mary, a statement of the truth about which they doubt. It is not fitting for Allah that he should take to himself a son. Glory be to him. When he decrees a thing, he says to it, only be, and it is. And then on it goes. That's up to verse 35. Now let me read where Muhammad actually got this from. And you'll notice it's not just a fact of plagiarism here. He alters the original text of the thing that he plagiarizes, because even that doesn't match his theology. This is in chapter 1 of the Arabic Infancy Gospel, also known as the Arabic Infancy, the Arabic Gospel of the Infancy of the Savior, on newadvent.org, as translated by Alexander Walker. Chapter 1. We find what follows in the book of Joseph, the high priest, who lived in the time of Christ. Some say that he is Caiaphas. He has said that Jesus spoke, and indeed, when he was lying in his cradle, you can see the parallel, said to his mother, to Mary his mother, I am Jesus, the Son of God, the Logos, whom you have brought forth, as the angel Gabriel announced to you, and my Father has sent me for the salvation of the world. So that's chapter 1 of the Arabic Infancy Gospel. Right there, he is claiming to be the Son of God. Well, what did we just read in chapter 19, verse 35 of the Quran? It is not fitting for Allah that he should take to himself a son. So even the plagiarized material is attesting to Christian theology, and Muhammad has to change it. Crap, he says, Son of God, let me flip it and alter that. Right?
Well,
so
not only that,
yeah.
It is very clear that this is refuting the original. The original being this factored fraudulent document anyway. But even then, it's refuting, because that's where the Son of God reference comes from.
Right.
There. It's not in the story in the Quran, it's in the other source. So he's using this to refute that one. He's rewriting it in order to refute it.
Yes. And he's reusing it for his own purposes, basically. And it's interesting also to see some other divergences and parallels. So, for example, in both the book of John, the Gospel according to John, and as we just read there, the Arabic Infancy Gospel, Jesus is called the Logos, or the Word of God. In the Quran, Muhammad changes this, and he still uses that. He still calls Jesus the Word of God, but he uses it in a different sense. He says it's in the sense that Jesus is created. He's actually a created being. He's not the eternal God, obviously. He's created, and he's created by the word of Allah. He's sort of unique in that way. God spoke him into existence, basically.
Actually, no. Sorry.
No.
It doesn't
Go
say
ahead,
that.
yeah.
It says that he is the word of Allah and a spirit from him. So it actually does still call him the word of Allah. And that's an issue, because if the word of Allah is eternal, that would mean that Jesus is eternal. It still uses the same definitive statement there, being the word.
Yeah,
In
I,
there,
I would.
it's interesting because I've used that with Muslims to parallel back to John, because there's no explanation of what it actually means in Islam, in the Hadith, or in the Quran itself. There's no explanation for why Jesus is the word of Allah, or the spirit from him. There's just nothing for that.
Yeah, what I was explaining there was more. I should have clarified. I'm giving the Islamic perspective. This is what a Muslim would tell you. But you're right
Yes,
that
that's what I'm looking
from
at.
another
Try
perspective,
to-
you'd say, well, hold on. It seems like he's almost like misunderstanding what he means by the word, because if he's saying that, then he is actually saying Jesus is God, like he's an eternal being. And so there's sort of like that mix up. But what I was trying to say is that's what a Muslim will tell you that passage means, that Allah spoke him into existence, basically. But you're right about that. I do agree with you. So yeah, that's interesting. But even in the Arabic infancy gospel, he's the Son of God, he's the Logos. He has a Father in heaven, and he's brought for the salvation of the world. So very high Christology, making Jesus the Son of God. The Quran very oddly has him say, by the way, not that anyone ever brought this up, but I am not the Son of God. Like, oh, well, no one was thinking that, but okay, thanks for speaking to us, Jesus, from as a baby. So, yeah, very peculiar.
Well, even going back to the passage itself, there were some interesting things said by Jesus himself, right? Because at no point was it what the Muslim claimed, which was he was there to defend her chastity. No,
Yeah.
that wasn't something that he said at all, as we've read through. In fact, it's only declaring what he allegedly was here to do, which he failed, by the way, according to Islam. He's an absolute and complete failure, which doesn't seem very respectful to me, but I digress. They talks about him being a slave to Allah. He's talking about all the scripture he's been given. So that would be the Injil, according to common Muslim theology.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, being the word, still him being the word of Allah and a spirit from him, even the normal Muslim narrative that you gave falls apart because of the hadith that talks about the end times and Muslims going to each of the prophets at the end, and they go to the first one they start with Abraham and start with Adam. It goes down through all the different prophets and then ends with Muhammad at the end. But they go to the first one and they each have their own unique one. So they go to Adam, and he was created with Allah's own hand. And then they eventually go to Jesus, and they say, hey, go and intercede for us with Allah, because you are, the word of Allah and the spirit from him. Okay, there you go. Again, it's something unique from him. And if it is that, Allah used his words to create him, he said be, and Jesus was. The issue with that is how Allah creates everything. Normally, except for Adam, which he created with his own hands. Everything else in the universe would be Allah's word then, because Allah said be, and it was.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
just dealing with that.
Why don't we go over a few more differences here? I'm looking at my notes and kind of the summary of each story. So in the Quran, one of the longer passages is chapter 3, 33 to 47. And in there's a few little discrepancies. It does talk about Mary being born by Imran, or Amram, if you prefer the biblical way of saying it. There's the conception of John the Baptist. And then Zechariah is silenced for 3 days, which is different than in the Bible. In the Bible, Zechariah is silent for like the entire period until John is born.
Mhm.
I don't know why that's different, but it is just something interesting to point out. They cast lots to care for Mary. Jesus has said he will speak as a baby, and there's the alleged creation of Jesus there. I want to point out this casting lots for Mary, along with some other details that are mentioned in the Quran. That comes from another source called the Proto-Evangelium of James, also sometimes called the Infancy Gospel of James. This is the earliest of all the sources that he quotes from outside of the Bible. It comes from around 150 AD, and it's actually a pretty notable source for a lot of different religions. It's vaguely Gnostic. So it'll tell you a little bit about Gnosticism from the 2nd century. And it's also where a lot of Catholics get their beliefs about Mary and her perpetual virginity and certain things like that. They'll quote that and talk about that as a source of early Christian beliefs. But then it's also where the Quran gets some of its narrative. But again, the Proto-Evangelium of James is not canonical. It's still very late. It's 150 AD. It's not a reliable source to get information on Mary or Jesus from. So,
Sorry, 1 second. You said how long was it?
it's from about 150 AD, 150.
About 150. So about 120-ish years after the death of Jesus. And you're saying that's an issue?
Well, and it's talking about the birth. So you could really say it's about 150 years after the events it's speaking about. And it even goes into a bit of Mary's life. So you could even push it a little more than that, maybe like 100, like 60, 70 years after the events.
So you're saying, sorry, I'm actually going somewhere.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're saying that you wouldn't find this reliable because it is so far removed, which is 150, 160-ish years from the event it's recording, right?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, yeah, it's too far for us to consider particularly reliable, I would say, yeah.
Okay. Muslims in the chat, that is sort of our criteria. We do not accept late sources. So all the hadith would be out the window.
Yeah. The
Because
earliest
all the
hadith are
hadith
from
are written way after that.
Yeah, like 200 years plus.
214 years for Sahih al-Bukhari.
Yeah. So it's it's not a source we would want to look to, at least not as Protestants. I mean, Catholics, Orthodox try to glean a little bit from it, but even they would say, well, no, we don't accept all of this, as truthful. So, yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to point that out because it is a difference between Christianity and Islam is we throw this source out because it is so late where they would have to accept it. So our critical examination of our own potential scriptures is more in depth than what theirs is.
Yeah, it's a good point.
But go ahead and continue.
Yeah. And then looking at some of the themes and differences, I would say that both the Quran and the Bible's narratives deal with the concept of doubting. So in the Bible, there's actually some interesting differences between Zechariah's reaction to the angel Gabriel and Mary's reaction. Zechariah is punished with silence. Now, in the Quran, he's not punished with silence. He is given the sign of silence. It's like, oh, how will I know this is true? You will be given the sign that you will be quiet for 3 days. Well, in the Bible, he is punished. He was doubting, like, how is that going to happen? What are you talking about? My wife isn't going to give birth to John the Baptist. What are you talking about? She's way too old. He's kind of snarky. It's not explicit in the text, but that seems to be the implication because he gets punished with silence until the day that John is born. And Mary, on the other hand, while she also asks, how will this be? How will this happen? I'm a virgin. It seems to be the implication that she is more inquisitive about this rather than sort of nasty or rude or doubting. She's just inquisitive, like, oh, how is that going to happen? But she's excited because she's actually given an explanation. So that's kind of interesting, that it's kind of dealing with doubt. How do we respond when we're doubting something? Or how do we respond when God tells us something? Do we react like the high priest Zechariah, who, despite his high stature and spiritual development, reacts with disbelief? Or do we react more like Mary, who praises God? And yes, she has some questions, but she does it in an inquisitive manner. Interestingly enough, I've always been told by Muslims that Gabriel is the one who appears to Mary in the Quran as well. But you'll notice that's actually not in the text. If you look up the Quran online and read the text, it's inserted in brackets that it's Gabriel. Rather, the person who appears to her is supposed to be a spirit in the likeness of a perfect man. That's what the text says, a spirit in the likeness of a perfect man. Or an angel, they might say, in the likeness of a perfect man. But Gabriel's never actually mentioned in the Christmas narrative. But I don't know why they insert him there. It's peculiar. Doesn't seem necessary for them to insert him there, but that's just something else. If you've also heard that before, that's technically speaking more of a Muslim tradition than it is something actually found in the Quran. It's not in the Quran.
You mean they added it? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's normal.
Yeah, there's a lot of additions in the Quran. You'll notice as you read translations of it, lots of words that are not there that the translator has to put into the text to help you understand what's being talked about. It's a very, in my view, a very incoherent book in that way.
See, Muslims, I thought Bitta was bad. I thought innovation was bad. Well, it seems you're doing it quite a bit to your Quran now, aren't you? Now, that being said, it is very interesting to see the differences between the questions asked and what the Quran says happens if you ask questions, which, oh yeah, you're no longer a Muslim. You're not allowed to ask questions if it would cause you to doubt.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah,
interesting.
and that brings us to some more differences here. So, for example, at the end of chapter 19, 2 to 35, we get to the point where Mary secludes herself under a palm tree, and she gives birth. In the Quran, she gives birth out sort of basically in the middle of the desert. She goes out somewhere east, it says. Secludes herself. There's no Joseph. There's no wise men. There's no shepherds. There's no escape to Egypt or Herod or the massacre, Herod's massacre. No gold, frankincense, myrrh, magi, no star in the sky, none of that. All that stuff is absent. Rather, she goes out east alone and gives birth under a palm tree, and a stream of water appears beneath her, and she bends the palm tree down, and it gives her dates to eat. It's a very peculiar story. And then after she gives birth, she goes to the town, and that's where Jesus speaks. But you're probably wondering, where did all that come from? Why is she not in a manger? Why is she out in the middle of the desert under a palm tree? And what's going on here? This is very peculiar, and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to these. These don't seem to have theological implications, as far as I can tell. If a Muslim knows what those things are supposed to represent in your religion, please let us know. But it seems like she's, getting a suntan out in the middle of the desert. What's going on here? Well, that's actually another plagiarism that's occurring. It comes from the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, which is actually around the time of Muhammad. That was circulating and was written about 600 to 625 AD. And so this is probably circulating around the time of Muhammad. He's probably hearing people talking about it. And guess what happens in that? Mary gives birth to Jesus alone under a palm tree. The palm tree bends down to give her fruit, and a stream appears below her. Well, that's in the Quran, chapter 19, verses 22 to 26, and 2350. So how convenient, the Quran is correcting the Bible. What, it's correcting it with a story that was written like a few years ago. Like, what are you talking about? Like, he clearly plagiarized it.
Well, that's a clear issue for Islam because it's supposed to be the words of Allah. These are supposed to be something unique, only written by Allah. But you see human writers write it before Allah gets to it. For Allah, he's just showing up too late to the show. Now, before we continue here, real quick, we do have a super chat here, which is talking about my toilet paper song is sleek and fire. Love it. Malik, the failed rapper, which he definitely is a failed rapper, and failed pre-med, mess with wrong Christians. Yep. That is just what happens, and the result is the song that we get to enjoy now that I had no interest in making or requesting made by Sal until Malik decided to do this, but we do have confetti for you. There we go. Congratulations. Thank you very much. And going back to the topic, though, some of those points are very interesting. And this is why. Definitely the stuff around Herod. Because Herod gives us a time period to go by. Because we know who ruled that area during that time period. We know that it was historically Herod. We know that these are historical claims that the Bible makes as not like this is how you know it's true, but things we can look up that will verify what the Bible says as true. And Islam completely junks those and just goes with this very vague narration that, yes, was made by humanity before, was spread around Arabia before Muhammad came along. And this vague sort of, she went off on her own. She's out there underneath the palm tree, and that's where she gives birth. And another critical point is, like you said, no Joseph. Where'd Joseph go?
Right. Yeah. No, he's not even mentioned. And yeah, it is a peculiar story in the Quran. I'll also say there is one other thing that he appears to copy from, or at least takes a little bit of inspiration from. It's very minimal, but you can give him a little bit of credit. He does take some content from Luke. But there is zero content unique to Matthew that Muhammad takes from, which could be a result of the fact that Matthew is significantly shorter than Luke. Matthew's birth narrative is only 47 verses versus Luke's, which is 136, both of them including their genealogies. So quite a bit bigger, over 2 times bigger. And so that could be part of it. But again, even so, the details used are quite small and insignificant in their nature. For the most part, Muhammad goes into the Infancy Gospel of James, the Arabic Infancy Gospel, the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, and then on top of that, just kind of sprinkles a little bit of its own imaginative flair into it. But he is not largely taking from any sort of historical sources. And to the degree that he even does, the question remains, well, he's not quoting, but he's taking a little bit from Luke. Well, which would you rather read? Would you rather read Muhammad's plagiarized material with a teeny bit of retelling of Luke, or would you rather just go to Luke itself, right? Why would I have the guy taking from it when I can just go to the original source myself? So, yeah. Pick up a Bible.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to remind the mods in the chat, just as a point of reference, as far as the rules for the chat goes, I'm pretty easygoing as far as what is said. Just anything that is a direct threat. You know what? I'd even allow that to go through. So just allow any sort of conversation to go through, and we'll just keep on rolling. But that nice house cleaning done. Again, is interesting what they chose to leave out. what information wasn't there. And you can see again him taking these sources. You have the romance of Alexander the Great. That's a
Yeah.
story that was widely around and completely just absolutely fabricated. There's no actual like, okay, you got Alexander the Great. That's about it. But the rest of it's just a fable that they spread around, just fiction. And Muhammad took it as serious, added it into the Quran. And here we see again, he's adding stuff from other sources. And again, he doesn't add like everything. He just adds bits and pieces, right? So what I keep seeing every time I go through the Quran and go through the Muslim sources is he's just taking little snippets and adding them. As he hears them and he wants to put them in, he adds those. It's very interesting because when he's referred to as the ear over and over again, but where he gets things wrong, where he hears only part of it. An interesting study for anyone to do is to look through the Bible and see the titles that Jesus says are specifically for him, and the titles that Allah then claims 600 years later are specifically for him. There's some parallels there. It seems that Muhammad heard Christians and Jews in the area referring to God as like the Word, or referring to God as the first and the last. Yes, according to the Bible, Jesus is the first and the last. And God is the first and the last because Jesus is God. In the
Right.
Quran, those are two of Allah's specific titles. So those are two of Allah's 99 names. It's very interesting seeing the parallel in the crossover. There's about, memory serves, 23. So there are 23 names only for Allah that Jesus also claims. Or that,
Yeah.
let's be honest with history, Jesus claimed them, and then Allah came along later on and said, "Oh no, those are mine. I'm that person." So Allah is literally, if you look at it chronologically, Allah is claiming to be Jesus. In fact, if you look at it, nowhere does, because Muslims like the exact word fallacy, because they'll go, where does Jesus say, "I am God, worship me"? And you're like, well, it's like he's claiming all these titles, he's claiming all this. It's no, I need the exact words. Well, you know what? In all the Quran and the Hadith, Allah never specifically says, "I am not Jesus." It's implied, but not specific.
Yeah.
Sorry, a little bit
Well, I
of
think
tangent
you
there.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, you do underline an important point, which is the ignorance of Muhammad is reflected in the Quran. He seems to not be learned enough to avoid getting himself into trouble, or at least Allah, this entity that's giving him this stuff, is not being particularly careful with his homework, because you end up with these. He talks about these concepts and these titles, but doesn't understand the significance of them. You know, God is the first and the last. Well, don't you know that that's what God in the Bible and Jesus in the Bible calls himself, right? That's just one example that you brought up, but it goes to show you, if he was trying to do this and he really knew what he was talking about, if he was really trying to make a new religion here, he would have been more careful to avoid saying those sorts of things, because he knew he would know that that would get him into trouble. But instead, he says things that end up sort of shooting himself in the foot, basically. So,
Yeah. And that's something that we see that he ends up doing a lot is, oops, I accidentally, and even if you just look at the Arabic itself, there's some interesting passages that definitely early on look like he's saying that Jesus is Allah, and can easily
yeah,
be argued. Definitely the one that talks about you're taking rabbis and priests as gods alongside Allah and Jesus.
Mhm.
Well, in the Arabic, that's two different sections there related to each other. So you have Allah and Jesus together, you have the rabbis and priests together. So it really looks like, okay, alongside Allah and Jesus. So Jesus and Allah are together in this. It seems that that would contradict what is later taught within the Quran itself. But after all, the Quran said much contradiction, if it had much contradiction in it. So it's giving leeway for a little bit of contradiction within the Quran itself.
Yeah, yeah. And
Was there any
another
other
thing,
differences you wanted to hit on?
yeah, actually I would like to talk about prophecy a bit. This is something I've noticed quite a bit in the Quran overall, but especially in this story. So in the Bible, particularly in Matthew 1 to 2 and Luke 1 to 2, where we'll find the Christmas story, there is significant emphasis put on fulfillment of prophecy. Matthew, in particular, goes through and explicitly names various prophecies that the story fulfills. But Luke, I would actually say, as I've studied this, he actually goes through more prophecies than Matthew does, but he never explicitly states them. The only explicit statement of fulfilling prophecy in Luke's birth narrative is when the angel Gabriel himself says, "This will fulfill something." But Luke, as a writer, doesn't put that in the text. He doesn't say, "Oh, this is to fill this prophecy," etc., etc. But there are dozens, and I literally mean dozens of prophecies fulfilled in the birth narratives in the Bible. I am unaware of any claim of prophecy being fulfilled or even reference to prophecy in the Quran. At most, it mentions signs. This will be a sign to you, whatever that's supposed to mean. But I think that shows you the theological richness and interconnectedness of the Bible that the Quran simply lacks totally. I mean, it's a very self-contained narrative. It doesn't check itself by the prior prophets. We hear Muslims constantly tell us, we believe in all the prophets, but they don't actually read what the prophets wrote. They don't have a guy who quotes the prophets or who cites the prophets or says, hey, check my work here, check what I'm doing. When I say this, you can go back and page through and see, oh, yeah, the prophet so-and-so did say that. Okay, interesting. Yeah, okay. And you can kind of measure it and measure it by that rubric of what the prior
Well,
prophets have said.
actually, it does say that you can go back and check and verify it using the previous scriptures. At least early on it did. In fact, there's nowhere in the Quran does it ever say that the previous scriptures were ever corrupted themselves. It says that they take it and change it with their mouths, so they alter it, or they write down things and then sell it for a small price. But yeah, the only verification now it does refer to a prophecy that's supposed to be in the Bible and saying that there is a prophecy about Muhammad coming. So it's like a retroactive prophecy because you don't hear about it until Muhammad's there. So if you're saying a prophecy of the future that comes true, there's only one I could think of. But if you're saying a retroactive one, then this one here, where Muhammad's saying, you find me in the old scripture, you'll find me, you'll know me as if you know your own child. It'll be so obvious, it's so plain. And nowhere do we see Muhammad being a true prophet in the Bible. We see him being a false prophet very clearly. In fact, there's a lot of parallels that you can look at when it's warning about false prophets to come. That's like, oh, well, geez, okay, here's a reference to Muhammad doing this exact thing. Here's a reference to Muhammad doing the exact thing here. Here's a reference to Muhammad doing another thing here that is exactly what they said a false prophet would do. So that's pretty bad. But the only prophecy in the Quran that seems to accidentally come true is the prophecy-ish, or the warning that Muhammad gives, and he's saying to the people around him that Allah is telling him that if he, Muhammad, were to fabricate anything, Allah would take him by his right hand and sever his aorta. And we find later on in the hadith that Muhammad himself admits that he is dying by the poison he ate at Khaybar that is severing his aorta. So again, that the only prophecy you find in the Quran of the future that comes true actually is Muhammad dying as a false prophet, which then would invalidate the whole Quran. But this is what we find in Islam.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I would just say that overall, I think the Bible has a much richer character to it. It's a lot more in depth in not only its history, but its interconnectedness with the rest of Scripture, even the prophecy and stuff like that. It just kind of takes on a much more rich character. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. See if there's
Real
anything
quick
else I wanted
here,
to cover. Yeah.
while
go
you're
ahead.
looking at that, something I want to point out is you went through and was talking about how many verses were coming from each of the four gospels, and it seemed that a majority of them were coming from Luke, and that makes
Yeah.
sense because of how Luke was written, because he wasn't giving his own story. He was investigating. He was going to the sources, the first-hand accounts, and saying, hey, what happened here? What happened here? So he's going back through and building this story up as verification of what other people said in addition. So it verifies the others and it goes in line with what the other gospels were saying, but it's a different tact at how it's approached. And that would lend itself to be an investigation because it's a lot more detailed. It's a lot more examined than someone just giving their testimony.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Yeah, so I would just say, I guess maybe we can summarize some things. There's more to talk about, but I think overall, what I would say are my takeaways regarding the Quran story versus the Bible story is that the Quran appears a bit clunky. It's not narrative. It's a bit confusing, brief, and includes a lot of plagiarism, whereas the Bible is comparatively longer and more detailed. The Quran is highly polemical, as we discussed, with Jesus addressing things that aren't even brought up in the first place, whereas the Bible seems to just be kind of trying to tell us a story, right? It's like, hey, here's what happened. Here's the details of how this story went. It doesn't, it makes its points in subtle ways, but it's not an awkward, like, it's not an awkward presentation, basically, where someone is saying something kind of out of place or it feels weird. Rather, it's just saying, hey, here's the story. The Quran, I would say, doesn't understand many of the theological concepts and traditions that it mentions and borrows from, such as the Messiah and the Word of God, in my opinion. Whereas the Bible has incredible depth, theological significance, connection to prior writings, and fulfillment of prophecies being mentioned constantly. And then the Quran also, as we mentioned at the beginning, comes from someone who, frankly, has no business telling us the history of Jesus and who clearly plagiarized from mostly unreliable sources. The Bible, on the other hand, is written by first century eyewitnesses and historians close to Jesus, his family, his followers, people who would have been there. Matthew is writing somewhere between 40 and 90 AD. Luke 55 to 90 AD, John 75 to 100 AD. So all these books that are telling us about the incarnation and the birth of Christ, the ones you'd really want to go to, if you're going to find any information that's true at all, is going to be the Bible. It's not going to be the Quran. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely. Yes. Anyone that's actually gone through and read the Quran finds a book that meanders in a non-chronological manner. And it's just all over the place whenever you're actually going through each topic. A lot of the ayahs, some of them can be, like I said, aren't chronological, so they can be years apart of each other. So they don't even have to necessarily be attached to each other. There's not like, oh, I'm going to read earlier in this chapter in order to understand the concept. No, there's sometimes they're related like that, but not all the time. There's no guarantee. That's why you need the hadith in order to have the extra explanation of it. And again, the hadith, the earliest one of the most reliable collections of the hadith, don't come around until 214 years after Muhammad. So that is a long gap to have for all this sort of context that you need to fill out the Quran here, or you're just left with a book with a bunch of holes in it. That being said, you only have allegedly a few authors. It's supposed to be one person dictating this and then multiple writers writing it down. So there's supposed to be one author with a bunch of writers writing it down, but you can't get a cohesive story out of this. By itself, most of it makes no sense. Most of it's just things you need the rest of the hadith in order to understand what's going on. Where the Bible is, again, the extreme opposite. So you have one author for this. You have over 40 authors for this, for the Bible. For the Quran, you have meandering, unclear, without context. The Bible, you find the context to the story it's giving you, and it's one continuous narrative from beginning to end of salvation and how to deal with it. The Quran, you get one person's perspective from revelations given to one person, unverified through any sort of actual investigation. The Bible teaches you to investigate if something sounds off, to take a critical eye at it, to look at it and investigate. We do not see that in Islam. In fact, we see the opposite, where it is not only discouraged, but the people who do it are killed. So I guess that would be the Quran and the Bible in a nutshell. So if you're looking at reading the Bible, you can take this as one narrative. You start from the beginning and go all the way through. This, you've got to take bits and pieces of it, and hopefully it can make sense to you. Most of the time, it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I think that just about does it. People, you can find me on Womb to Tomb Apologetics on YouTube, and let Eric and I know. Do you want to see more collaborations between the two of us? Did you like this? If you'd like more on this topic, I do have that live stream where I went over all the verses, verse by verse, going through commentating the Bible's narratives on the birth story, as well as the Quran. So you can see a full overview of that if you'd like to. I'll link that for people below. But yeah, thanks for having me on, Eric. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so go over, take a look at what he's got, subscribe, and yeah, take a look at the in-depth description that he puts on there. And if you guys would like to see more collaborations, I'm always game. It's always fun to have someone to talk to, someone to go through the sources with. And I believe you've given a different and interesting perspective on it that I would not have taken. So I think you've given a great value to us today, and I thank you for coming out and joining us. Let me see here. I'm running out of these. I'm going to get more of these little balloons. So what is coming up and what can people expect going to your channel, looking you up? What are some of the things that you're looking at hopefully doing in the future?
Yeah, so my next videos are probably going to be sort of a more goofy, memey, pro-life video, but I usually do pro-life apologetics and things like that if people are interested. But I also do a lot with the Bible, dealing with atheists. There's one video I'll be doing with that, talking about whether God is a man-made construct or whether we are a God-made construct. Responding to an atheist on that and his 10 reasons. I'll be doing an interview, as it seems you will be doing as well, with Be the Iron on YouTube, that's David Suarez, who wrote a book called The Death of Allah, talking about some other Islamic dilemmas beyond the one that we're most familiar with. So those are some things to look forward to, but I also have a celebration live stream about the Antichrist because I'm reaching 666 subscribers. So stay tuned for that as well.
So you're celebrating the Antichrist?
Not celebrating the Antichrist, celebrating 666 subscribers, Eric. It's a big difference.
Okay, I was just being clear because, man, that came off and it was like,
No,
wait, hold
no.
on. Who did I invite to my channel here? Whoa, okay.
Yes, I've been leading people astray the whole time. No, but yeah, so that'll be fun. That'll be with Dr. Tony Costa, which many people are probably familiar with. So
yeah, I've had him on this channel. Got the opportunity to meet him in person. Fantastic guy. Man, I'm looking forward to that one. I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
I'm going to be there.
Well, sweet.
That sounds fun. So thank you to Jack Ray, who gifted 5 Your Brother in Christ memberships. There we go. The confetti falling again. Let's go. Got a lot on my hat now. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you again to my wonderful guest for sticking it out, for doing this research, and for sharing his study with us. If you guys want to see more from me coming up in the next couple of days, I have some shorts. It seems that the Muslim cowboy, once again, has contradiction within the Bible. And we will be dealing with that this week. So I'll be taking care of that in one of the shorts this week. The reaction live stream on the 21st will probably be postponed. And the live stream next week with Be the Iron might be moved to the following Monday. So those are up in the air because there might be some things that I might have to go deal with. So I might need to take a little bit of a break from live streams in order to accomplish it. But believe me, you guys will like it. So thank you guys once again and enjoy yourselves. And as always, Deus Vult.